Welcome back to Power Play. The Conservatives are set to put a motion before the House of Commons tomorrow calling for changes to and a review of a program known as the Interim Federal Health Program, where asylum seekers and refugees who aren't covered by a province are provided access to health care services paid for by the feds. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre shared his party's position in a social media video on X this morning. Have a listen.
Fact: 6 million Canadians can't get access to a family doctor. Fact: it takes 30 weeks for the average Canadian to see a specialist. Fact: while you can't get health care, Liberals force you to pay higher taxes to fund deluxe supplementary health care benefits for asylum claimants who've been rejected, who are non-Canadians, non-permanent residents, and have never paid taxes in this country.
Michelle Rempel Garner is the Conservatives' immigration critic, and she's here with us in studio right now. Hi, Ms. Rempel Garner. Good to see you here. Thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So I looked through the text of the motion that your party's team was kind enough to send over, and it looks like much of it is predicated. The changes you're suggesting are predicated, at least in part, on citing costs and how costs have increased as analyzed by the parliamentary budget officer. How much money would what you're pitching, what your party is pitching, actually save? It's
a great question. So 10 years ago, the amount of money that this program was expending was about $66 million. I think today it's over $1 billion. And so we're hoping to get back down into the territory where the program is focused on the people it was originally supposed to help, which is people who are fleeing war zones, not the people that we've seen illegally cross the border, claim asylum, and jack up those costs over 1,000% to over $1 billion. We've heard a lot of experts and folks talk about how the fact that this program, being as generous as it is, it's providing benefits that many Canadians don't have access to, like vision care, physiotherapy. That might actually be a draw for false asylum claims. So by saying, hey, you know, especially for false asylum claimants, people who have had their asylum claims rejected, non-citizens, we shouldn't be offering anything beyond basic emergency life-saving care. That might actually probably will reduce the burden, and it will get back down to a much more manageable level.
Do you know that it will? I listened carefully to how you were describing it in the House, right? The idea of being put forth, and just in that video as well, that it's kind of bogus claimants that are driving up the cost. Do you know for a fact that that is what's driving up the cost?
Oh,
because when I
absolutely.
looked through the PBO's report, he isolated, for example, the amount of time it takes for someone to get through the system, even through the appeals process. That has increased very much, and the sheer number of people who are making those claims. Like, it's a combination of both, according to his analysis.
We do know that there's a lot of bogus asylum claims. We've seen today, for example, there was a big report that came out from a very reputable institute in Canada that talked about how the government has actually put forward a list of countries, many of whom are hostile to Canada. They're just rubber stamping approvals. This is not how the asylum system used to be managed in the past. What we're seeing is because the backlog is so big, especially after the hashtag Welcome to Canada tweet in 2017, we're seeing more asylum claims being made that are probably not in the spirit of what the asylum system is supposed to support. So I think that it's well past time for the federal government to do something to reduce the amount of bogus asylum claimants that we've seen in the country, and certainly providing lucrative benefits that many Canadians don't have access to seems to be like a common sense solution to me.
So their contention is that they are doing a couple of things to reduce that. That C-12, you know, half of the bill in their estimation is focused very much on having more control over the asylum system and being able to condense the wait times, which the PBO isolates as a big driver of the expanded cost of this program. They also have made changes that come into effect on May 1st, I believe, to some of the aspects of this program that I think the calculation is would save about $138 million.
See, I don't buy any of this. So there's over 300,000 people currently in the queue just today. When you compare that to 10 years ago, it was less than 10,000. So that's a huge inventory of people. Some people who've been waiting, like you said, for years to have their claims even reviewed. And we know just by statistics, that many of those people have bogus claims. So that's a problem.
But how do you know that? Just to be clear,
well, we know that from the government's
anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, well, we know that from the government's own statistics that they put out. And even just from programs like the hotel costs, right? Like we've talked, and I know you've talked about on your show, the fact that the government spent over $1 billion housing many people who have found to have had bogus asylum claims in hotels in the country. So I think, look, across the board, we want to have an open and welcoming system that people who are facing legitimate persecution can find refuge in Canada. But that's not what's happening now. We're seeing people illegally cross the border, make fake asylum claims, and frankly, people who have overstayed their visas make bogus asylum claims. We need to stop the draw on the system or the incentive to abuse the system by reducing some of the benefits that make it very lucrative to do so. And that's what this motion is all about, is saying, look, let's get back to common sense. Let's restore order and fairness. And I don't think that there's anyone in Canada who thinks that somebody who's been found to have a fake asylum claim should be given better health benefits than a Canadian taxpayer who's paid into the system their entire lives.
No, I completely understand the point that you're making there. I think a couple of things, and I would say, like, I have interviewed many different successive immigration ministers on this file to ask about those things.
But I've seen them all too.
But a couple of things, right? And I understand the concern that the ability exists to abuse the system. But do you have, like, quantifiable evidence that that is, like, why they're coming here? And even in the PBO's own analysis, it showed that on average, even though the number of people making claims under this system, this program, have gone up, it's still on average less than what the average Canadian cost to the healthcare system. It's not like they're, the burden of it is overwhelming it to the point that this is the single thing causing all the delays that people are facing or the issues in the healthcare system. I just wonder how fair the characterization is.
We have a major study in front of the Immigration Committee right now where we've had people come in, even just today, and say that certain government decisions that the federal government has made is likely incenting people to abuse the system. So, and I mean, it's just logic too. I mean, if we're offering free hotel rooms, years-long review, every social welfare benefit, better benefits on healthcare than Canadian gets, I think logic dictates that people are going to make fake claims to abuse the system. So I think that everybody agrees that that's a situation we don't want to be in. So it makes sense that we say, why don't, like, this is low-hanging fruit. This is easy things that the Liberals could do right now to change the incentives to potentially abuse the system. So that's why this motion is just like, look, let's not give better health benefits to people that have bogus refugee claims than Canadians get. I think that that's something I would hope all Canadians agree on so that we can restore consensus in Canada's immigration system.
But don't you have to know how many of those claims are actually bogus? And is the solution taking them all away? Pardon me. Is the solution taking them all away from people who genuinely might need them?
But that's not what we're saying. The motion says for bogus refugee claimants. It's focused on that.
So people who are waiting an appeal on their denial, their asylum claim.
But they've already had their asylum claim rejected.
So at that point, you're saying?
Yes, I think that should be the case. People who have had their asylum claims rejected, we need to start getting to a point back to restoring the spirit of the law in Canada. We made many different amendments. We proposed many amendments to Bill C-12 that you mentioned so that we're getting back to the spirit of the law, which is people have the right to due process in Canada, but they shouldn't have the right to endless appeals while receiving better benefits than Canadians get. I think that like, when we talk about the crumbling immigration consensus in Canada, it's the fact that we've diverged from common sense positions like that way to the far left on things that people don't agree about. We need to come back. And that's what the motion says tomorrow, and I hope that the Liberal government will agree. I don't have a lot of hope based on what I saw in question period today. It was very disjointed, all over the place, but I want to see that consensus that was across political stripe in Canada, where we supported immigration, come back. But to do that, levels have to be set in accordance with Canada's capacity to integrate people, housing, jobs, healthcare. And this motion just says, look, if somebody's been found to have a fake asylum claim, maybe we shouldn't be giving them better benefits than somebody who, let's say, has paid their whole life into the system and can't get access to, let's say, a hip replacement right now.
Do you know how many of those people were actually accessing those services, though?
Well, we do. We have a pretty good idea. I'll give you 2 points. So we do have the statistics on how many people make a bogus claims, right? And that's, give or take a bit, roughly half. Then the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, when he was testifying before committee on how he made some of his assumptions, he was talking about the fact that the Liberals didn't really actually provide him with all of the data that he needed to make a true forward-looking projection, which I suspect is even worse than what's in there right now. So this is why Conservatives did the responsible thing, and we said, hey, can you please go back and get us this data? Unfortunately, the Liberals are filibustering that at committee right now.
I take your point on that. The PDO, though, did acknowledge that he basically assumed about these escalating costs that asylum seeker levels would stay where they are, claimant levels would stay where they are. They're 80K less. They were 80K less in 2025 versus 2024. And he also didn't, I know you say you don't believe them, but these changes are supposed to come into effect May 1st, saving about $138 million on an annual basis. He also didn't calculate any of that.
But let's, like, $138 million, a good chunk of that is going to go to bogus claimants. I think rather than setting up a bureaucracy to try and get 30% back, the taxpayers still paying 70% of that, I don't think that's a great use of taxpayer dollars. I'd rather that we just don't pay for anything beyond emergency life-saving care for somebody that's been found to have a fake asylum system claim in Canada. The Liberals are talking about setting up, and I mean, you and I think we've talked about the fact that Liberals can't even get, you know, some of the expenditures from scammers during the pandemic back, right? How are they going to? I don't think that they're going to be able to collect this money.
I think it's more humane than just sort of brandishing everyone in the same way.
Somebody who's made a false asylum claim, who has gone through due process in Canada, they probably should leave the country, and we shouldn't be prioritizing them to have anything beyond emergency life-saving care. I think having due process in the asylum system and then having access to life-saving care, I don't think a lot of Canadians would say that somebody in that situation should have access to vision care, physiotherapy. And we have to start having these hard conversations, right? Because we've seen the consensus for immigration in this country crumble. And if we can't get back to this common sense positions where most Canadians agree, then we have a problem. So this is why we have a common sense motion that is going to restore that principle of order and fairness to Canada's immigration system, and hopefully get back to, you know, I'm really worried about this, and that's why we've been putting forward these types of solutions. But no, we can't, there has to be a line drawn, right?
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate you making the time. Michelle Rempel Garner is the Conservatives' immigration critic.